everyone. Hi everyone. Welcome to BrainCandy Labs. I'm Ava Astro. This is our very first virtual kids conference. The session today is the world's youngest astronaut in training with Alyssa Carson. First, some housekeeping. I invite you to turn on your cameras if you wish to get up close and personal with our speaker. You can switch your view from gallery view to speaker view at the top of your screen. All lines are muted so we don't get too much background noise. As our speaker shares with you, you'll probably have questions. Put them in the chat and she'll get to it in a later section. Now let me introduce you to our speaker, Alyssa Carson. At just 18 years old, Alyssa's list of accomplishments includes witnessing 3 space shuttle launches, attending Space Camp 7 times, Space Academy 3 times, Robotics Academy once, youngest to graduate, Advanced Space Academy, and multiple Sally Ride camps. In October of 2016, Alyssa was the youngest to be accepted and graduate the Advanced Possum Academy, officially making her certified to go to space and an astronaut trainee. More than anything, Alyssa is driven by the insatiable desire to live life to the fullest, to break through the ceiling of possibility, and make a positive and lasting impact on the world.
Hello, can everybody see me? I guess just give me a thumbs up, I guess, because I can see some of you guys. Awesome. I really just want to start out by talking a little bit about what I do, and then also kind of a little bit about things going on right now in the space industry, or even some cool stories about space to kind of get you guys interested a little bit. But we're going to spend most of the time hopefully getting through some questions that you guys might have, because I really just want to talk about what you're interested in and what parts of space you're interested in. But basically for me, I got interested in wanting to become an astronaut when I was just a little old girl. So probably around 3, 4, 5 was probably around the time that I got interested in space. And looking back, kind of the thing that we think got me interested was actually an episode of the Backyardigans. So I don't know if you guys watch the Backyardigans at all, but I actually had watched the video of or the episode of Mission to Mars, and basically on this episode there were kind of the different friends on the episode wanting to go to Mars and ride a shuttle and do all these things. So I then kept asking my dad all these questions about space and about Mars and wanted to learn so much more. And so that's kind of where it all started. So I basically do all sorts of things relating to space. So some of them involve kind of cool, crazy trainings and different helmets and spacesuits, which are a whole lot of fun. But basically, I'm just preparing to apply and become an astronaut in the future. But the goal is to eventually be on one of the missions on Mars. So hopefully, either some of you guys can either be a part of that and not necessarily traveling to Mars, possibly some of you could, but even just kind of working with that mission as well. So there's a whole lot of exciting new things happening right now in the space industry. In case any of you guys saw, there was a recent launch, which was very, very exciting. And so there's a whole lot going on. So I really just wanted to kind of chat really quick and kind of encourage you guys a little bit to look more into the space industry, and kind of encourage you guys to find your own dreams, because I know that me, when I was 3 years old, saying I wanted to become an astronaut and go to Mars, it was about the craziest thing I could have picked and not really that realistic at the time. But the more I work towards it, the more of a reality it's become, and the closer I am to becoming an actual astronaut. And so I really just want to encourage you guys to kind of look at school, what subjects interest you, what things are you interested in right now, what's something you may want to do in the future, and then make that your dream. If that changes along the way, that's perfectly fine as well. But really find something that you guys are interested in, and then start doing some research. Obviously you guys are here, you guys are wanting to, learn more about whether that's space or, whatever your reason is for being here. So this is a great place to start, and I'm really excited to see that you guys are reaching reaching out and looking to learn more about what you are interested in. But yeah, I would definitely just say start kind of in your local area. I know for me, I started looking at different things around Louisiana because that's where I'm from. But we had some day camps that I went to that just really talked about science, and that's kind of what got me started. So kind of find that dream and really start pursuing that, and never let anyone take it away from you. Because if it's something that you're interested in and something that you want to do, you can definitely achieve that dream. And there's another little thing that I kind of want to tell you guys a little bit about. Is just kind of all the different types of jobs that there are in the space industry, just because I know that there's kind of the typical astronaut or engineer that you might think of when we're talking about wanting to go into a space job, but there's so many other cool things as well. We've sent so many different kinds of animals into space. We've done different tests with sending spiders and bees and fish and those kinds of things in space to see how they react, or even people who prepare the food for the astronauts. So there's actually someone who has to, sit there and prep the food for the astronauts to be able to eat every day on the International Space Station. There's even people who study like the psychology of it. So they study how the astronauts think in space, and they'll even study how let's say the food causes what the food does for them. So for example, the astronauts can't eat mac and cheese every single day that they're up there. So there's actually people who study like what food they eat and when, and how that actually affects them and affects their work. So there's a whole lot of interesting things to get into. So those are just kind of some quick jobs that you wouldn't necessarily think of right off the bat when you're thinking about a space job. But also keep in mind about all the different opportunities coming out, not only at NASA. NASA obviously is great and full of different amazing experiences and job opportunities, and also become an astronaut, but also with the private industry and SpaceX and all sorts of new programs also coming up. I definitely think that you guys are going to be able to see a lot of exciting things happening in space, possibly a mission to Mars, possibly working on that, or even space tourism. Wouldn't it be pretty cool if you were able just to go to space on a quick vacation, several hour missions, get in the rocket ship, go to space, hang out for a little bit, float around, and then come back. And I think those kinds of crazy things are a lot closer than we think. So there's a lot of new things happening in space. So if space tourism or just the idea of becoming an astronaut interests you, I definitely think that that's something you guys could be witnessing in your future. But if you personally are interested in becoming an astronaut, I would definitely say it's important to figure out what you're interested in doing besides becoming an astronaut. So you need some kind of a career to actually become an astronaut. So for me, I'm studying astrobiology, which is just kind of a complicated way of saying that, we're studying basically anything living in space. So that could be bacteria in space, that could be studying planets, that could be anything like that. So we just study life in space. So it doesn't actually have to be just people, but kind of anything going on in space. So that's super exciting. But you guys could also, study anything else, robotics or rockets or engines or anything like that can kind of relate to becoming an astronaut. So that is kind of just like my spiel to begin with. But I really do want to get into some questions that you guys have, because I already see that you guys are asking a lot of wonderful questions. So I want to dive into those.
Yes, Alyssa, there's so many wonderful questions. And the first one is, why does your badge say blueberry on it?
Yeah, so Blueberry, as you can see here, is my call sign, which is kind of like a nickname, but it kind of has to be given to you. So I got Blueberry the second time I went to space camp, and basically the story behind it is just that I wanted kind of like one of these blue flight suits that I saw everyone wearing, and I was too small to actually fit in any of the actual ones. So my dad bought like this fake knockoff one that was just a really dark shade of blue. So everyone told me I looked like a blueberry while wearing it. And so, for the rest of the time at space camp, everyone would say, oh, blueberry, do this, whatever it might be. And I was like, okay, whatever. But I even came back the next year to space camp and they're like, oh, it's blueberry. So they kind of continued with it. So now I just embraced it. And now my nickname is Blueberry.
So fun. Another question is, do you aspire to work for NASA or SpaceX, or which one exactly does that look like for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, obviously, NASA is planning on doing a mission to Mars in the future. You know, they're building a brand new rocket, a brand new capsule, all sorts of exciting things happening on that front. So, I mean, NASA right now would probably be like the biggest contender for, looking at going on a mission to Mars. However, I wouldn't necessarily count SpaceX out of the question. I do think that, with the amount of crazy things that SpaceX has done already, I think it's totally possible for them to start gearing up for a Mars mission or something like that. So, I'm not necessarily dead set on just directly working with NASA. If SpaceX wants to start their own astronaut corps, I would happily apply.
Yes. Ava, do you have some fun questions for Alyssa?
Um, yeah, there's one from Penelope that says what's the most difficult aspect of your training?
Yeah, that's a pretty great question. I mean, I've done a lot of pretty crazy different training experiences like along the way. So we have like microgravity flights, water survival training, G-force training, and all these kind of crazy things. But probably the hardest was the water survival training. So basically, we had to wear spacesuits, we had to swim in the spacesuits, we had to kind of pull ourselves into life rafts while wearing the spacesuits. So everything was just super physical. And it was very tiring just because the spacesuits started to fill up with water, which made them heavier, and it was just really difficult. But it's something that we all have to learn.
She also wants to know what is space camp like? Are there space camps across the country?
Yeah, so Space Camp, so the main one that I'm kind of directly referring to is the Space Camp in Huntsville, Alabama. So that is kind of like the main space camp, probably like the largest and most developed space camp. So basically what you do there is once I think you're 9, you can spend a week there. But basically during that week, you do simulated missions, you ride simulators, you build model rockets, you learn all about the history of space, also what's going on in space. You get to just kind of hang out with other people who are interested in space. And there's some pretty cool simulators, like I said, that are kind of fun to ride. And then also just like the different missions are pretty exciting as well. You also do like little small challenges like building Mars colonies or whatever it might be. But there's also other camps kind of around the country, not necessarily directly space camps, but there's also other camps, a few that I've also been to. There's Cosmosphere in Kansas, which is a space camp. There's Virginia Spaceflight Academy in Chincoteague, Virginia, I think is the name of it. But there they kind of deal with rocketry and robotics. So there's definitely places all over the country to kind of look into. There's not just the main space camp, but that's too far for you guys.
Courtney, are there any others? We can take turns.
Yeah. So another great question says, what do astronauts feel when going into space, or what effects does it have on their bodies?
Yeah, we are constantly studying that. We are constantly learning more and more about what space does to the body and what happens in space. So, for example, what we've learned so far is that basically the more we are in space, our bodies try to adapt to space. So since we are floating, our bodies kind of figure out that our muscles don't really need to work as hard anymore. Our muscles don't need to be as strong, because even right now, most of you guys are probably just sitting down. And even though it may not feel like you're doing something active, your body is still fighting gravity. So gravity is still pushing down. Even you lifting up your hand, that's using a lot of your muscles because we're fighting it. We just don't really feel it that much because we're so used to it. However, when we do go to space, we no longer have that force pushing down on us. So our muscles get way weaker. Our bones lose a lot of density, so they get weaker as well. So our body just kind of starts to turn almost like to jelly. It just doesn't lose, it kind of just loses all of its strength. So that's why it's super important. Astronauts exercise a whole lot in space. They exercise probably an hour and a half every single day, just to kind of keep their muscles working. So we have special equipment that we use to actually have effective active exercise, because you can't just do push-ups in space. You're not actually moving anything. You could do no-handed push-ups in space if you wanted to, because you're floating around. But we actually have special equipment up there to kind of actually really work our muscles. But sometimes it can be challenging to come back.
Gravity makes me short.
Gravity? You think gravity's the reason?
And another question is from Matthew, kind of in the same arena, but it says, how do you train for zero gravity so you don't bang your head on something while you're floating around?
Yeah, so there's different ways that we kind of train for zero gravity here on Earth. So sadly, we don't just have like a no gravity room that we can all just kind of hang out in and experience it. So it's a little complicated to get that feeling of zero gravity. The only way we can do kind of long-term microgravity is actually underwater. So if you guys ever notice, like if you're in a pool, your friend is like all of a sudden way lighter, and you can kind of lift them up and play with them and like throw them around in the pool because they kind of feel way lighter than they would outside of water. So astronauts will actually practice like the entirety of their mission in a gigantic pool, and they'll be fully submerged in spacesuits and things like that to actually practice that. But as far as like short term and like not underwater and kind of things, and this is more specifically as to what I've done, so we can actually do it with airplanes. So airplanes, there are specialized airplanes that can actually go up, and basically what they do is that they kind of pull up at a pretty steep rate, and that puts the pressure on your body almost like you're taking off on a rocket ship. And then as they tilt over, they make almost like little hills, and so as they come down, the plane is actually free falling, and so basically everything inside the plane starts free falling at the exact same rate, because science pretty much, and basically with that, everything inside floats. And so basically when you do that and when you come down, you'll get about 20 to 30 seconds of weightlessness. So usually for the first time, everyone's buckled in just so you can feel the weightlessness, but you're safe and just kind of get comfortable with the feeling. But after that, we're kind of let loose a little bit. We're actually doing research on my flight, so we kind of just do those hills over and over and over and over and over again, to get different times of weightlessness and being able to do testing in them. So it is pretty exciting, but it can be pretty tough on your stomach sometimes.
Valentina asked a question. She said, do you know if there are going to be opportunities for kids from other nations to go into space careers?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that so many people kind of look only towards NASA in terms of things that are going on in space. But however, there are, many different space agencies around the world that are kind of working. And, the International Space Station has been a huge part of that. I think it's like 40 different countries have either contributed in some way or have sent astronauts up there. So that's really exciting that we've had that much collaboration. But at the same time, despite, some countries may not have a space program at all. So I think that has been a huge curve. Obviously, some people in those countries can still work at these other space agencies, but it gets more complicated when they start applying to become an astronaut. But I think kind of that situation is about to change, mainly because with the private industry, let's say SpaceX starts having their own astronauts, they may not have those same restrictions, so let's say NASA wants you to be a US citizen, SpaceX may not care. They may just want the best astronaut they can get. So I think that there's going to be a lot more opportunities for people in different countries.
There are questions about aliens, but Penelope asked, do you have an astronaut that inspires you?
Yeah, I've met a good bit of astronauts along the way who have definitely inspired me. If you talk to any astronaut and tell them you're interested in either becoming an astronaut or interested in a space career, they're always super supportive of that because they want, more astronauts to follow in their footsteps. One astronaut in particular was a female astronaut named Sandra Magnus. So she was a shuttle astronaut, and I got to meet her when I was 9. And she basically just told me a little bit about how she got interested in wanting to become an astronaut, and from then on I really was motivated because I realized it didn't matter how young I was. to decide that I wanted to do this, I could still do it and I could still achieve that crazy dream of mine. So she really just taught me that I could, you know, follow my dreams despite my age.
Another question from Olivia says, do you have any struggles or pushback from people because you're a female astronaut? Or what would that look like?
Yeah, you know, definitely in the space industry, there are more boys right now in the space industry. It's just kind of how it is, just because it's so many different science fields, and typically science, it has a lot of boys in it. So, you know, it's kind of been a bit kind of all over the place. I mean, starting out when I was at space camp, there were a good bit of females, but there's definitely more boys just going to space camp in general. However, like more of the kind of more realistic training that I've done, all of that is kind of with a private just research group. And so with us, we're just everyday people wanting to do research. So within that, you know, we have a good bit of females involved in that. You know, us females kind of just stick together, and we have, you know, our little team, and we all encourage each other and that kind of thing. So yes, there is some challenges there, but also the females that you are around, there are just such a great community to be in. And, you know, nowadays we're starting to have a lot more female astronauts being selected. However, you know, there are tens of thousands of jobs that send that astronaut into space. So it's going to be exciting to get more females across all those different kinds of jobs in the space industry. You know, there's still situations where if you go to a NASA facility, there may be a department where there's still only one woman working there. And so that's kind of the next steps that we're trying to change.
Another question from Zita says, can you please talk about the military pathway to becoming an astronaut in Space Force?
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, kind of there's a million different ways to become an astronaut. You know, there's no set way or one way to do it. Going into the military is a really popular way to become an astronaut. And kind of the reason for that is the first astronauts were all from the military. So when we were looking at, you know, who we should send to become astronauts, the first idea was to take these military pilots who had been training in airplanes and doing all of these crazy things, and then putting them into space. And so, you know, also just being a pilot in general is really popular when looking at becoming an astronaut, because we have, you know, astronauts who have to fly the rocket, fly the shuttle, you know, whatever is going on. And so that's kind of why we get so many astronauts from the military. So most of them are, you know, Air Force, but there's also been, you know, a lot of other different branches of the military that have become astronauts. So it is a very good route to actually become, because putting all of your military experience on your resume is super beneficial. And then kind of the idea of Space Force that has come about more recently is just kind of having a branch of the military that focuses slightly more on space. So they're not necessarily just like training astronauts all the time. Like their goal isn't necessarily just to send astronauts to space or train these astronauts. There's obviously other ways to do it. But kind of the goal of Space Force is just to have some sort of regulation in space. You know, we have, especially now, because we're about to have so many people traveling to space, so much going on in space. So we want to make sure that all the stuff going on in space is slightly more regulated and still under control. So we want to have people watching that.
Can we have a quick video?
I'll be the first human to step on Mars. I've prepared for all these feelings and sensations I'm going to experience out in space. Like how to breathe, move, and even fly.
T-minus 30 seconds and count.
And with each step, each breath, I get closer every day.
We are still gold.
This next generation is going to start exploring incredible worlds. And I definitely believe Mars is that first step in doing that.
Internal. 12.
I'll never forget about all the little things I love most about planet Earth.
Ignition sequence start. Entire crew is go.
But nothing will ever stand in my way.
2, 1.
I'll find my way to a new planet we will all call home. One day, I'll be sending love from 250 million miles across the universe.
there's a lot of fun videos in there of like the different things that I do. So that's super awesome.
Another question that I have, that, what friend asked us this? Olivia said, did you ever think about quitting because something was so hard or because you thought you couldn't do it?
Yeah, there's been a lot of hard things. I mean, even, seeing in that video some of like the dunking underwater and all of the crazy things kind of look really intimidating and really scary. Even like that water thing, we had to hold our breath and, I was convinced I was going to drown. I was terrified to do it. But after I did it one time, I was like, okay, I can actually do this. And, that comes up a lot. And, wanting to become an astronaut, there's a lot of scary things that you kind of have to overcome. Just kind of those little fears. Obviously, they're going to make sure you're safe, but it's kind of sometimes hard to get out of your head, as well as, just kind of on the education side of things. Becoming an astronaut can be really hard and going into a science field that can get really complicated really fast. And so, sometimes in the different space courses that I've taken, I've been really intimidated by all the complicated math and everything going on, but it's definitely important just to kind of take a moment and go to either your teacher or whoever can guide you, or even some friends to kind of help kind of explain it to you a bit more simply or at a slower pace, whatever it might be. Because I know once I started all these kind of crazy trainings, the different classes I was taking, I remember one time, it was kind of maybe a couple of years ago, but the teachers started talking about calculus, and I had no idea what calculus was. I had never started calculus. I had never taken any calculus. And for him, since everyone else was so much older, they were like, oh, let's, take a trip down memory lane and remember some of that calculus we learned. And I was like, but I haven't learned any of it. So some situations like that were really hard, and just wanting to stick with it. Different things I've done with, I started flying not too long ago, so I have my pilot's license now, which is pretty exciting. But I remember I went to and did my first flight, and was with my instructor, and I came back home, and my dad was like, oh, how was it? Did you like it? And I told my dad, like, I don't like it. I really hate it. I think I want to quit. I really just don't want to fly. I just don't enjoy it. And, I was explaining to him, I don't think we should put the money into it if I'm not going to enjoy it. And he said, why don't you give it one more try? And then if you don't like it again, we'll stop. And so I went one more time, did a second lesson. And then I came back and my dad asked me the same question. And I was like, oh my gosh, it was so cool. We did this turn and we, did this and he taught me this and whatnot. And I ended up actually loving flying so much. The more I did it, the more I enjoyed it. So even though things might be scary or hard in the beginning, it's really important to kind of push through that first initial fear or challenge to kind of see what is to come afterward.
Awesome. Another question says, how did you advance from starting to have an interest in space to going to space camp to being an astronaut? What were the things that you did to move forward?
Yeah, when I was first kind of getting interested in space, the first kind of task was just figuring out what kind of astronaut I would want to be. Did I want to be a pilot? Did I want to be a scientist? Did I want to study medicine? Did I want to go into the military? Did I not? So there were kind of all sorts of options when I was first getting interested. And I started out by just learning as much about space as I could, learning about the rovers that were on Mars, learning about, how astronauts go to space, what rockets do they use, and those kind of just little simple things. We ended up finding out about the space camp in Huntsville, Alabama by just a coincidence. We happened to see a billboard for it. So we went and then found out that they had a space camp there. So space camp really was an awesome place for me to go just to learn even more about space, but also kind of help me figure out what kind of career I would want to do. By doing all the simulated missions and pretending to be an astronaut and flip the switches and playing all these different roles, I was able to learn that no, I didn't necessarily want to be a pilot. No, I kind of just wanted to sit in the back seat on the ride up. Once we get to space, I would love to do an EVA, go outside, fix something, or on a mission to Mars, want to be able to like collect stuff, research it, do all the sciencey stuff behind it. So space camp was kind of the starting point of me figuring out what I want to do, which would kind of lead in terms of like what I would study. And then everything else along the way, all the different trainings and videos that you guys are seeing is just kind of me searching for things I'm interested in, which can kind of vary. You know, if you're looking into going into robotics, you know, build a robot, find a robotics competition in your local area. You know, start by just doing some research as to what is around you and what opportunities you can start by doing. You know, Possum, which is where I do kind of all the crazy microgravity flights and water survival training, and that I actually found out about that by going to one of these camps. So I was telling my counselor at the time that was interested in becoming an astronaut, and she told me that she heard about this program. She didn't know what it was, she didn't know what it entailed, but I might want to look into it. So it's very important just to talk about your dreams and tell people what you're interested in doing.
And do you have any questions, Ava?
Bodhi asked, do you personally believe in aliens? If so, do you think we can or will discover them soon?
Yeah, you know, looking at going to Mars, one of the really big, exciting things that we want to do while we're on Mars is actually look for any signs of bacteria. So we think that it is possible that there's little bacterias living on Mars. Obviously, they're very, very small. So I don't think that there's like any little green men walking around on Mars or anything like that. But I do think it's possible for bacteria to be living there. And the reason why we think that they're there is because of the amount of water that we found on Mars. So we have found ice, we have found liquid water, we have found steam. So we think it's possible for the bacteria to be living in that. But as far as like more intelligent aliens or more intelligent life, I do think that the universe is so big and so huge that there has to be something somewhere, but I don't necessarily know how close they are to us or how close we are to communicating with them in any way.
I have some more fun questions about Mars, and it asks, what more do you want to do on Mars? And what tools do you use to find bacteria on Mars?
Yeah, so the goal of kind of the first missions to Mars is going to be trying to learn as much as we can about Mars. So, you know, especially with what I'm studying and all the science that I want to do on Mars, kind of the tests that and experiments I want to do is, you know, take some soil samples, research the soil, what minerals or what resources are in the soils, maybe take some rocks, see what they're made of, do a lot of testings with the water, look for the bacterias, and for the kind of testing of or looking for bacteria, we'll basically just collect samples of any sort of water or ice that we find. They're depending on the types of bacteria that we think that there could be different tests, but kind of just looking under microscopes, seeing if we see anything, or even running some different chemicals that would actually make the bacteria pop out. So there's actually different chemicals that can turn bacteria different colors, so you can actually see them better. So there's different tests like that we'll be able to do. Also just studying the atmosphere on Mars and actually seeing if it's possible to turn Mars into another Earth, because that would be the ultimate goal, right? To have like a second planet to live on. So we're just going to test and learn more about the planet to see if that's possible.
Why specifically did you want to go on Mars and not other planets?
Yeah, you know, well, when I was younger, I think I was interested in Mars just because, you know, that was just kind of what was on the television, what people were talking about. You know, I didn't know if people had been to Mars yet or not, but it was just kind of the first planet that I started to learn about. But now, you know, understanding a bit more, Mars is really the next place that we can explore. So, you know, we have plans to go back to the moon right now, but then after the moon, the next place we can go is Mars. You know, it's the next planet that's closest to us. And on the other side of us is Venus, which is just kind of like scalding hot. It's super hot, not really ideal, a very thick atmosphere. It would be very dangerous to go that way. So Mars is really the next place that we can go with our technology.
That is very exciting. Very excited for you and that next step. Ava, do you have any questions? I think she just popped off for a minute, but a lot of questions have been, what classes and opportunities is out there, kind of maybe beyond space camp, but what are other opportunities for kids that might be interested in becoming an astronaut?
Yeah, definitely space camp is not like a must. You guys don't have to go to space camp in any way to become an astronaut or to go into a science field. There's a whole lot of different, opportunities, but a lot of it just starts with, a lot of it revolves around education and, staying in school and just knowing that that's going to be important. I know, because I know, for me, school was pretty boring because I knew I wanted to be an astronaut, and I knew that some of the things I was learning wouldn't necessarily be useful in becoming an astronaut. But sometimes you just got to stick through those things to actually achieve your dreams. But kind of like besides camps and things, I think that just in general, the internet is just a huge source of information, whether that's learning stuff about Mars or space or whatever career you're interested in getting into. Also, just the amount of like space movies and documentaries and stuff that there are now. A lot of those, some are a bit unrealistic, but some of them do have some interesting points, as well as books and just kind of any sort of research that you guys can start looking into now will be super helpful in the future.
Someone was asking, Isabella asked, can you recommend any space books?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, as far as like space books, so I actually have a book called So You Want to Be an Astronaut, which is on Amazon, which is basically full of, all sorts of recommendations and kind of talks a little bit about what I did, but also recommendations for you guys to follow whatever your dreams may be. But kind of besides that, I think another good thing to look into is books written by astronauts who have been to space. A lot of astronauts will come back and write books talking about their story. I think Clayton Anderson wrote a book called From Boyhood to Astronaut. And I think, what was the other one? There was another one that I was going to mention. But now I've just forgot it. But basically, astronauts do write a whole lot of books that are super cool. Also, in general, just like any sort of Mars books or space books or planetary books, a lot of just simple, I guess, like learning books will kind of detail out the solar system or teach you about the different planets. And I know that's kind of where I started, was just kind of looking at those sorts of books. So those could be interesting as well.
Oh, Ishal asked, what do astronauts in the ISS do?
Yeah, we basically always have people up on the International Space Station, and they're always working. So it kind of depends on what's going on at the time. So for example, the 2 astronauts that SpaceX just sent up, they're doing, the work that they're doing is a bunch of testing with the different equipment that SpaceX has sent up. So obviously this is the first launch using their capsule and their rocket and everything of sending people to the International Space Station. So while they're up there, they'll continue to be running tests with like their different machinery, their different technologies that they've put up there to make sure everything's working properly. But different astronauts, depending on what they've studied. So we've done a lot of medicine in space. So we try to, solve some medical problems that are here on Earth because we can do testings up in space that we can't do here on Earth because we're in microgravity. So that's something that's also interesting. A lot of studies with different plants or, like I mentioned, even animals going into space and doing tests with those. So all of those different experiments are basically to benefit some kind of question that we have here on Earth.
I know you may have already answered this question, but Addie really wants to know when you will go to Mars.
Yeah, the goal right now for the missions to Mars is to be in the early 2030s. So kind of far away, not too far away. The next 10, 12 years from now is kind of the plan of going to Mars, which sounds really far away. However, we do plan on going back to the moon in the next couple of years. So the goals for going back to the moon is like 2024, 2025. And so those missions should be coming up in the next few years. And then after that, Mars will hopefully be around 2033.
Mm-hmm. Do any aspects of space frighten you? If so, how do you conquer these fears?
Yeah, I mean, definitely there's a lot of dangerous stuff in space. I think that for me, since ever since I was little, I was constantly learning more about space and learning about all the dangers of it, radiation levels, space junk, this, that, and the other. So I think for me, it's just kind of normal at this point. I'm just like, oh yeah, space has this. So they don't necessarily scare me too much, as well as, just meeting people who work in the space industry. You see how important safety is to them. So safety is like top priority for everyone in the space industry. So it definitely makes me feel like I'm in good hands when I'm talking about the space industry. But also for me, I think I've kind of brought or gotten the idea of an astronaut and just thought of it as a normal everyday job that you would have on Earth. I think of being an astronaut like similar to people who are in the military. They'll go to wherever that place is, they'll spend several months working and doing their time, and they'll come back home to their family. And I kind of think being an astronaut is that same mindset.
That question from Penelope. Okay, Courtney, do you have any questions?
Yes. So what are you doing right now to get you ready for your next steps? A lot of these kids want to know, what are you studying? What does your day-to-day kind of look like to get you ready?
Yeah, kind of day to day kind of changes every single day. There's no like everyday kind of schedule or anything, because every day is pretty different. But I mean, right now I am in school in college. I just finished my first year of college, which was super exciting. So I was studying astrobiology, which like I mentioned, is basically studying any sort of like life in space from bacterias or to entire solar systems and planets or plants or people. So that's kind of what I'm studying right now. But kind of besides that, any sort of like training things that I do, those are usually like they're usually planned. So they'll usually be about a week long. I'll go to wherever the location might be for that one, spend a week there doing nothing but that training. And then, come back and go to school and continue doing whatever else. But for the most part, my day to day is, just as a normal, I guess, student would be, going to school, doing homework, those kinds of things. But I definitely will pick up like a space class, an online space class, or speeches or anything like that every now and then when I have some time.
That's awesome. And another question is kind of from end to end, how long does it take for someone to become an astronaut? How long is that training?
Yeah, so, to actually just apply to become an astronaut, all you really need is to get a master's. So, kind of, you go through college, get your degree, and then go and get your master's, which is another year of schooling. So, kind of after schooling, you just need some work experience, and then you pass the physical. So, that's actually all you need to actually apply to the process. However, you have to think about, how can you stand out? How can you be different? What's something that you can add to make you different from, everyone else that's applying? So there's not necessarily any training that you have to do before you apply. But, as you would, any other job, how can you meet the bare minimums, but maybe add something special? So those are kind of the things that you can do before applying. But kind of actual training, once you're selected as an astronaut, all astronauts spend about 2 years doing basic astronaut training. So they learn all the basics of going to space and being an astronaut, and then after that, they can be selected for a mission.
Those are really cool suits behind you. And Angela was asking if they were real.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of the different blue suits and stuff are kind of my old flight suits from when I was younger. The white suit, so the suit is actually a replica, but it has Buzz Aldrin's signature on it, which is pretty cool, which is the reason why it's displayed. So it's his real signature signed kind of on the pocket here. So although the suit's not real, because that could get pretty pricey sometimes, but his signature is there, so that's really cool.
Did you ever consider any other careers?
When I was younger, I definitely thought about doing different things. I kind of bounced around when I was younger, but for me, it was kind of crazy. The way I thought about it was that I would be an astronaut, go to Mars, come back, and then be a teacher, or be an astronaut, go to Mars, come back, and be the president, or, whatever I was hooked on at the time, whatever new career I was thinking about. It always kind of came after becoming an astronaut. So I always thought astronaut was the most exciting and would be the most fun to do. So it was kind of always my number one choice.
Awesome. Another great question is there anything else you can work at NASA for without going to space?
Yeah, there's all sorts of jobs that you can do at NASA without ever going to space. Most people who work at NASA don't go to space. So there are people who build rockets, there are people who build engines, there are people who kind of test all of that. So doing different engine tests where you light the engines just to see if they work. There's people who make spacesuits. And so there's all sorts of different kind of areas you can go into at NASA without actually going into space.
Olivia also asked a question. If you could take anyone to space with you, who would you take?
That's an interesting question. I feel like I would say my dad, but I feel like we just get on each other's nerves after a while, but I know that he would like to go to space as well. Honestly, it could be interesting to bring Elon Musk or someone really smart, so that way if there's a problem, just be like, Elon's got it, and just kind of sit back and enjoy my time in space.
Funny. Ava, do you have any closing questions as we end our time?
No, but I want to thank Alyssa for coming, and I wanted to say I hope you all enjoyed this Brain Candy Lab session of the world's youngest astronaut in training with Alyssa Carson. We love your feedback, so please go to the chat and see our survey link. Brain Candy Labs is an opportunity for kids to get curious and learn from role models. Just like today, you can read more on our site in community at www.braincandylabs.com or follow us on Instagram at BrainCandyLabs. We'd love your feedback, so please go to the chat and see our survey link. Our next session is at 12 p.m. with our special guest, Emily Calangeli, whose session is called From Engineer to Science TV Host, How I Became Space Gal. We'd like to thank Witty and our sponsors, Ring Central, Blink Page, and Geico. Until next time, this is Ava Astro for Brain Candy Labs, reminding you to stay curious and don't forget to ask the next best question.